Hi guys, welcome back. So a couple of you said that you would be interested in seeing this video, so I thought I would go ahead and make it. I haven't necessarily prepped so much for it, so we'll just see where this goes. But today I'm going to be doing a discussion video of The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. This is a novella that's set in the same world as the rest of the Kingkiller Chronicles. The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear. I have not read Wise Man's Fear yet, but I did read Name of the Wind, and it was like a 1,000,000-star read for me because I'm completely obsessed with it and love it. So I picked this up in March and buddy read it with Liene from Liene's Library. Both of us really enjoyed it. She's the one who actually convinced me to read Patrick Rothfuss in the first place, and I'm so glad she did. This is such an interesting book, and I'm going to tell you now, this is not going to be a spoiler-free discussion video. This is going to be spoilery, so if you haven't read it and you don't want to know what happens, then you probably shouldn't watch this. Also, I will say, if you have not read Patrick Rothfuss and you're looking for a place to get into his work, I would not recommend this. It's really good, don't get me wrong, but this is not a good introduction. You definitely should read Name of the Wind before you read this. It doesn't spoil anything. It's not about our main character, Kvothe. In fact, he never appears in the book except sort of in the background. This is a kind of odd little novella about Ari, who is this very interesting side character. She's this sort of strange, waifish girl that lives in the tunnels underneath the university, the like magical university that Kvothe attends, and he somehow manages to meet her and befriends her and tries to take care of her to whatever extent that he can. And so Slow Regard of Silent Things is not like a normal story. It doesn't have a typical plot arc. It is several days in the life of Ari, and we just sort of live in her head and see what she does every day, where she lives, and her routine, and the way that she thinks and handles things. And it's really interesting and really unusual. And Liene, because her and I discussed this quite at length, both of us were saying that as much as we really like Ari as a character, and it was interesting getting to know more about her and be in her head for a while, doing it any more than this, which is fairly short, would probably be too much, because she's kind of all over the place. And I would argue that based on some of the things we see happen in this book, that Ari is a character that deals with mental illness, and maybe in a couple of different ways. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because I do think it's kind of interesting. It's not something that's said outright, it's not something that's diagnosed. Obviously this is a fantasy book, but I do think it's clear that there is something going on with her. There are a couple of occasions where she deals with pretty intense anxiety attacks that happen in here. You also see her engage in some behavior that is very similar to OCD symptoms, which is kind of interesting. And I would also say maybe some PTSD symptoms. We don't get a lot of information. We get hints of things, and in some ways I think Patrick Rothfuss leaves you with more questions than answers in this book, but you do get lines that hint at deeper information, which I think is interesting. In fact, there were a couple of lines in this book that make me think that Ari was at some point probably the victim of sexual assault. And there's definitely some lingering trauma associated with that, which I think is kind of interesting. There's also a lot of questions that are unanswered that you get hints of about who Ari actually is and how old she is. We don't really know. We know that she looks like this sort of waifish girl, but there's clearly a lot more to her than meets the eye. In this book, we get hints that maybe she has had training in alchemy, which is interesting, that she's got some degree of magical abilities, and that maybe she fled from the life she had and now is just living mostly in isolation. So I have some theories. Let me know if you guys have read this, if you have theories about some of this, but my theory is that Ari is much older than she looks. We do know that at some point she was a student at the university. I think she probably studied alchemy, and something happened, some traumatic thing or things happened that made her flee and live underground where she is in hiding. And I also think that she's kind of fallen into herself, and that maybe there's been some degree of physical transformation to make her look smaller and younger than she actually is, because it's better for her for hiding. So we don't know that. There's, you know, nothing for sure, but just given various things, I really wonder whether that is the case. Ari is also interesting. She's such a complex character. The title of the book, The Slow Regard of Silent Things, I think it's probably about the fact that for Ari, everyday objects are personified, and she feels like part of her duty is to put things just right in these various rooms and places that she discovers underneath the university, ruins and long forgotten rooms, that moving physical objects to the right places and in the right ways will, you know, I don't know, maybe change the aura of the room and make them happy and make them feel better and make things more positive. And so this is part of what she does throughout the book. It's part of what she feels like her responsibility is to do. But it is interesting because there's also a piece of it where you see her frequently deny herself the things that she really wants, where she'll want something but say, no, that would be wrong because it's not for me, like a sheet, for example. And sometimes it's really heartbreaking to watch, like, you know, this girl who has almost nothing, and then to see her, because of, in her mind, the way that she thinks the objects are responding to things, forego things like the comfort of a warm blanket on a cold night, when she could have that, or, you know, just, yeah, that to me was really heartbreaking to watch. But she's also just this lovely, whimsical character, and she even has moments that allude to her having some degree of sense of her own sexuality, which I think is kind of interesting because it's unexpected. There's so much more to her than meets the eye, and being in her head is fascinating and unusual, and I loved this book, but it was also deeply saddening and disturbing in some ways, but also beautifully written and lyrical and whimsical and thought-provoking. I just loved it. The other kind of cool thing about this is it actually has illustrations throughout the book, which kind of add to the story. So you get like pictures of Ari. She's this like waif-like girl with all of this cloud of hair. And it's a beautiful little book. Like the illustrations, I really love it, and she's such an interesting character, and you just want to know more about her. And I think you also get a hint in the background that she loves, and maybe is even to some extent in love with, Kvothe. There are definitely some indications of that. He's in the background. She's waiting for the day that she knows he's going to come and visit her, and she's looking for an appropriate gift because they exchange gifts back and forth. And so that's a big part of what we see happen in the story. One thing that I thought was really interesting that I think Liene brought up was in Name of the Wind at the beginning, you have Kvothe go through this litany of his accomplishments and things that he's known for. And one of them was something about saving a princess from a dungeon or something like that. And there is some speculation that maybe Ari is that princess, and the under thing, the tunnels underneath where she lives, is the dungeon, or that something else happens with her. So there's a lot of speculation about who she might actually be and how she relates to the larger story of Kvothe in the Kingkiller Chronicles, which I think is really interesting. But overall, I just thought this was a beautiful book that was really touching, and I think, and I'm curious to know whether this was Patrick Rothfuss's intention, but I think it's also a very real look into the mind of somebody who may be dealing with various forms of mental illness. You know, I see symptoms of severe anxiety, of OCD, of post-traumatic stress disorder with Ari, who's just this lovely character, but you see her deal with these really painful things. So anyway, I think it's really interesting. I think it's beautifully written. I'm very excited to read on in the series and read Wise Man's Fear because, I mean, I know I'm going to love it, and hopefully he'll one day finish book 3 because that would be fantastic. Do talk to me in the comments down below if you guys have read this, if you have any thoughts on anything I said, if you agree or disagree, if you have your own ideas about it. I would love to chat with you. If you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.